Howdy, folks. I hope y'all are having a good evening. This is a Mad Painter, and I'm here with Mark Eddy, and this is Open Canvas. And I want to remind everybody we are totally listener supported, so if you got a buck or two, we'd sure appreciate it. And I'll tell you what, if you get our CDs that you can get for, I think, $35 for the whole year's worth of shows for your favorite host, and that means all of them. Mine and Mark's the last 2 years in a row. If you get them, it's equal to probably about, 6 years in college, right, Mark?
Oh, yeah. I would agree with that. I think we're bringing the best professors to the airwaves.
For free. You ain't got a student loan to pay either.
It's. I think our version of history is more accurate.
Well, I think we're going to shed some light on some history. Most people don't get to hear this type of history, do they?
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. So just enjoy the next 2 hours. Yeah, our guest is returning after 3 years, maybe, and it's been way too long. It's
been a long time.
Yeah, it has been a long time. But during those 3 years, he's researching for this Giants on Record book, doing the Lost History of the Giants TV show, the Dare Stones episode that was on was a History Channel 2. So Jim Vieira is here. You've seen him all over TV in the last few years. So welcome, Jim. Thanks for gracing us with your presence tonight.
Gracing. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Thomas, for having me on. I appreciate it. And pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you're the subject of your new book. You and He Newman's new book is pretty awesome subject, and I find it very intriguing, as Mark does too, don't you, Mark?
Oh, it's a book that you really need to get, because you do have the documented cases. You got whole, all across the country, and I think we're probably going to jump around to many states and find out what was there. Who were these 7-foot tall people inhabiting North America? So
yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And let's start off with a. You can just get on Facebook and see all kinds of photoshopped material, and you address that there are hoaxes. There's a long line of them, but the Photoshop contests and debunking kind of psyops that seems to go with the Facebook posts are out there. What do you make of these doctored photos?
Yeah, certainly. In the preface of our book, we talk about them in particular and other hoaxes that have occurred. We all know about the Cardiff Giant in the late 1800s, a 10-foot tall giant made of gypsum that was, pulled off as a hoax, basically to deride religious-minded people at the time. The guy who did it was kind of an a-hole. And, honestly, Hugh and I tried to look objectively at this whole controversial subject. Some people might not think so, but, I would say at first when I got into it, I really was just kind of stumbled across accounts in town and county histories where I live. And then I was basically sharing this information thinking like, wow, people would find this fascinating, historical accounts, respected doctors and academics, basically talking about a history that is little known and very bizarre. And then I ended up really catching out of flack, and I kind of oriented to a defensive posture as if I had to personally prove the case myself, which is the wrong approach. The right approach is to be objective and not have an agenda. And, I've moved out of that position and just try to make the case that this subject is worthy of further investigation. And that's kind of where I stand now, that there's quite a bit of compelling evidence. And, Hugh and I debunked many things in the book, like the fake horn skull. If you've seen that is from a it's in a strange museum of oddities in France, and it's not real at all, but it was, it goes around the internet as if it's real, attached to a story from the 1917 New York Times about Warren K. Moorhead and Allison Skinner, the archaeologists who unearthed a burial mound in Tioga Point, Pennsylvania. And basically, the story that read was that there were giants in this burial mound, and they had horned skulls. And I did some research, and I found that Allison Skinner, the archaeologist, wrote an editorial with the New York Times the week after and said, essentially a reporter yelled, "Look, they have horns," and there were deer antlers buried at the heads of these skeletons. And in fact, they were normal sized. And we try to dig into all these cases to the bitter end to see if there's any truth or not. And that's just an example of, you really just can't believe what you read. You got to dig in and find the truth about yourself. And that's not to say there aren't many, many cases that the end result is that it appears that the measurements and the descriptions were of enormous skeletons all throughout ancient America. So you can get caught in a position where you have an agenda, you have a position, and you're always trying to defend it, or you create the illusion that you have all the answers, and you just leave out information that doesn't suit your case. And I just don't want to be that guy. I see it on that error made on both sides, the debunking side and the true believer side, that just doesn't want to look at the evidence and wants to make their own assumptions up based on, piecing together something. So, I feel like we did a good job in the book, quite honestly, of remaining objective and letting the reader make up their own minds.
We can come back to the 18-foot example. You are fair with the very real possibility that the measurements could have been taken inappropriately, but we'll come back to that. But your book is discerning. There, you do make differences between the Cardiff giant and what was really found in the mounds. You start the book off with really good examples of the Spanish explorers' documentations. Let's get into that a little bit. We're going. You go from Florida to Texas with like these 1570s journals and captain's logs and notes that people wrote down once they returned to Spain.
Yeah, absolutely. All the most famous explorers you can name, essentially every one of them themselves, or the chroniclers, reported encountering enormous native people, native chiefs, native rulers. 7, 8, and 9 foot tall was reported. And the conventional view of that is like, oh, the Spanish averaged about 5'3", 5'4". The natives were maybe, sometimes 5'11" or 6 feet, and they were perceiving them as giants. But that story doesn't hold up when you read the actual accounts. Basically, from Patagonia to Virginia, and like you said, around out to Texas and Florida, the Spanish and the English explorers like John Smith and John Lawson all reported the same phenomena. It's quite remarkable. And this isn't, these are live people that, you're looking at the objective or the observational abilities of these explorers, and that's what they were all about. Like John Smith's maps, John Smith helped found Jamestown in 1607. He was so accurate in his maps that NASA was really talking about a couple of years ago, like analyzing his maps to talk about how remarkably accurate they were. And I would assume he'd be able to accurately convey how tall a person was. A lot of these accounts were this chief on his knees towered over our men. And in the parade in Mexico, we saw the 9-foot giant, and this giant was 2 feet taller than all the men. It wasn't these guys were 5'11". They're talking about like Tuscaloosa in Alabama and his son were purported to be 7.5 to 8 feet tall, both of them. So it's another interesting twist where, Coronado, Vespucci, Magellan, like I said, John Smith, Francis Drake, they all reported enormous people from Patagonia. And we have photographs from Cook the Explorer at the turn of the century, 7'4", 7'6", 6'6" women, the onus down in Patagonia. So, there are enormous people that we're talking about, and described well out of the range of normal too. Like, once again, 8 foot tall or taller, which is, in anthropology we find outrageous, but that is what's reported by all these respected individuals. And it's, just quite telling. And the chapter covers all the accounts. You can read them yourself. And in their own words, they are describing, basically people who anthropologists would tell us should not exist at that height in that proportion. And another thing is, just like the skeletal reports we cover in the book, they're not talking about skinny NBA players. They often talk about massive, proportional, huge people, like NFL linebackers who were 7.5 feet tall. That just boggles the mind, and they had voices like bulls and things like that. So it's just another interesting piece of corroborative proof that makes you wonder. I'd like to build a time machine and see what was happening here about 600 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jim, since you do note in Giants on Record that the descriptions of the giants is that they are well proportioned and adjectives like that, and you say that that does seem characteristic of being able to rule out gigantism. Like so some of the disease was it like a pituitary gland that can cause people to grow abnormally tall, but they aren't as muscular.
Yeah.
So
well, like Robert Wadlow from Alton, Illinois, about 100 years ago, or 60 years ago, grew to 8 foot 11.5 inches, but he had pituitary gigantism, which is a condition that causes you to just grow and basically not turn off that, that glandular system or the hormone system, and you end up with this, like a disease condition where you can't walk without crutches. And this isn't what we're talking about here. These are people who are considered robust and, remarkably athletic and proportional. The reports of disease conditions are few and far between, and actually Native Americans were well known to have few disease conditions compared to Europeans and other peoples. So that's not what we're talking about here. One of the things is when I started getting into all these accounts, basically the line I got that these were mastodon bones and hoaxes, and reading through, it's not, New York Times front page articles all the time. It's often that you have these accounts buried obscurely in town and county histories by respected historians all around the country, basically talking about the same type of phenomena, the same dimensions, the same proportions, the same descriptions of a stationary object with the same anatomical anomalies, with like a huge jaw that fits over the face or double rows of teeth, things like that. So to me, it's like a historian is not embedding this account on page 600 of his voluminous town history as some sort of a hoax. Doesn't make any sense. And these are human burial mounds. These aren't mastodon bones or animals or something else. And they're certainly not hoaxes. They have to be something else. There's a mystery here. You know, what it is can be debated, but you just dismiss it like it is like some anti-scientific nonsense is the wrong approach. There is a mystery here that has not been deciphered at all, and it still lingers, and it's just utterly fascinating to me.
So, with the descriptions that, plentiful descriptions that you document, there was not okay, we'll acknowledge that there were a couple giants, but in just over the thousands of years of occupation, they really amounted to a NBA basketball team. That's all we're going to allow. Yeah, you're saying that like this was a normal genetic condition, and they were found spread all the way across America.
Yes, we're talking about, and I've immersed myself the last 5 or 6 years into orthodox anthropology and archaeology, and to look at both sides of the argument, because there has to be an anthropological link that, you have mitochondrial DNA testing and genome sequencing that's happening now that's really telling us kind of the migration routes and the development of Homo sapiens from Australopithecus and things like that. And, I strive to understand it, and I just can't, just proclaim some truth without a link, an anthropological link. And so we look into our ancestors, like the Denisovans, or our cousins. The Denisovans were a cousin of modern-day humans who interbred with humans and Neanderthals 40,000 years ago, and deeper back in antiquity, also in a Siberian cave called the Denisovan Cave, or Denisova. So anyways, we have a anthropological link that may tell us that, gigantism or like giant genetics were inserted into Homo sapiens at that time, because the only physical evidence are two massive teeth. If you Google Denisovans and Denisovan teeth, you will see that when they first found these teeth, they thought they were cave bear teeth, and they took them to Max Planck Institute and did a gene sequencing and realized that, there is a lot of humans have like 2 or 3% of Denisovan DNA that they've interbred. So you also have Heidelbergensis, a branch in South Africa that Lee Berger, the professor there, says indicates a period of gigantism about 150 to 200,000 years ago in South Africa, where he routinely has found bones indicating over 7-foot people. And in fact, he has half of a femur shaft that's twice as large as a normal human femur. And look up, if any of your listeners want to look into more about Heidelbergensis, just some Google keywords, Lee Berger, Heidelbergensis, giants, something along that line. And you'll find his interview with, I think it was Chris Singley, if I'm not mistaken, but he gives a couple paragraphs where he talks about a period of gigantism. And that's another compelling thing, that you have megafauna and megaflora existed, up into the late Pleistocene era, about 13,000 years ago. And that's the same story that Native Americans tell, that basically there were pre-Diluvian giants that existed. along with megafauna, megaflora, 600-pound beavers. And if you go to the late Pleistocene area, it's just a weird place filled with toxodons and giant beasts and giant, plants. And it's a strange world that, anthropologists look at, not a lot of physical evidence to tell us about our past. And because it just doesn't exist. A lot of places that, the conditions aren't right for the preservation of bones. So it's a puzzle that's being put together, but it's compelling. You just can't throw out, giants existed. If you believe it, you have to find some kind of link. And I'm just trying to figure out if the story has validity through the channels of anthropology and archaeology, and how the theories can fit that into its reality.
And since you just mentioned migration, you do cover that some of the Spanish explorers did document some of the giants had red hair, blonde hair. There's like not Blackbeard the pirate, but some with black facial hair, red facial hair. That kind of sounds Irish, European. Do we know where these? Did the giants originate in America, or did they migrate here from somewhere else?
Yes, very interesting questions that have yet to be answered, quite honestly. If you had, migration, say, from the Irish to the ancient America, you would find, their campsites, their midden piles, their artifacts, and there really isn't overwhelming evidence for that. There are strange artifacts, out-of-place artifacts that pop up here and again, but it's tough to pin down, what's going on, quite honestly. You have to look at, from an archaeological context, like, what does the physical evidence tell us? What does the artifact evidence tell us? And, it takes a lot of detective work. I always say that, basically, let's let technology catch up. I think a lot of people misperceive that, and I have at one point, that archaeology and anthropology are like a wing of a corrupt system. And there is a lot of conspiratorial talk. And I got into that one. I just read so many accounts by Smithsonian scientists in the past that have reported enormous skeletons, 17 accounts over 7 foot tall. And I'm like, it was never addressed by the heads of the Smithsonian back then. And it really seemed like there was something being covered up. And I'll say that there was academic bias and there is agenda on the professional side. There's no question about it. It's just human nature.
Well,
and then on the other side...
Why do you think they're hiding the fact?
Well, I just think there's academic filtering, if you will. In the late 1800s, science was wrestling the crown away from religion, and anything that supported religious ideas was derided. And so, Darwin came in, the theory of evolution took over, and creationism was, pushed to the side. And I just find, that bitter battle ended up entrenching theories and not looking at these things more open-mindedly. So you have filtering and academic bias. The idea of a cover-up is, that's more like a Monsanto or, like the CIA, the NSA, this insidious kind of organization that is compartmentalized, and you can get away with like insidious acts, basically. And I've researched the NSA and the CIA, for instance. You can see all the evil that they've done in the redacted documents, and there's a lot that happens in our world that is conspiratorial. It's just true. The way that oil companies operate, and I don't want to get down that road, but the point is, when you look at like archaeologists and anthropologists who, they're essentially doing their job, you may question the set of rules they follow, or the agenda they follow. Like some people would say, I don't fully believe all their theories, and they don't think outside the box, and some of that is true. But the idea that there's an active cover-up is another matter. You really, even if you wanted to pull that off, you couldn't. Like, why wouldn't the anthropologists want to cover up, giant evidence when they found the hobbits in 2003 in Indonesia, Homo floresiensis? They didn't cover that up. It's kind of it's a logical conclusion. So what is really going on is the question. Why are there two divergent views of reality? And I just say, like, I know there are creationists who are testing dinosaur bones the last couple of years, so like the chronology group, and getting dates back of like 20 and 30,000 years old, man, which I find fascinating. I'm like, yeah, let science decide. But like Jack Horner, the professional, he's on PBS all the time. He's a paleoanthropologist maybe. But anyways, they're kind of shutting down the further testing of bones to get radiocarbon dates from, they never radiocarbon dated dinosaur bones because it only goes back about 50,000 years. So some creationists started to test these bones. And what I say is, do the test and let science decide, and don't have a preconceived notion and attack the person who just wants to figure out, if it's true or not. I find that both sides are entrenched. It's like politics. Like, I'm not going to, the Democrats, the Republicans, they're not going to give anything to the other side because it's like a support for them. It's just the same thing. Like, I'm not going to admit anything about like an alternative theory, or in turn, like the true believer would say, I'm not going to believe anything that an anthropologist and archaeologist says. So you end up with this entrenched system that is really not good for the advancement of science and knowledge. It's more like I said, like politics or religion, with agendas driving it, instead of, real sciences. Like, have your theory, test the theory, look at the results. Are they reproducible? That's the approach. I think people need to loosen up and open their minds more, and then, test things scientifically if they can to figure things out.
Jim, are there any known surviving giant bones that could be tested?
But yeah, it's unfortunate. The problem with that is that so many of these bones are just were destroyed. Like in Martha's Vineyard out here in Massachusetts, in Edgartown, in the center of town, all the farmers and the townspeople, they would just basically pile up the bones in this huge pile from all their activities of building foundations and clearing the land, and so much was destroyed, used for road fill. There was no respect, for the native remains, and that's a point of contention, a bone of contention, if you will, with the native people. They're upset the way their ancestors' bones are treated. And as my buddy Ross Hamilton, talks about, when a conquering nation comes in, or group, they destroy the burial places of the former heroes and the rulers, which certainly happened with the looting, the careless destruction of these burial mounds that had sat for thousands and thousands of years, obviously untouched by Native Americans. The colonists just basically spread through the country and unearthed and desecrated so many places. And then what survived was repatriated because of the 1990 NAGPRA, Native American Graves Protection Act, Repatriation Act, which I understand that the natives want these bones respectfully put back in the ground. But as somebody who is anthropologically curious, it kind of leaves this void where there's nothing to test really, and it's illegal to dig in burial mounds and, of course, in burial sites. So you end up, I would think this evidence has to come from another country, or it has to come forth like a couple of years ago, they found fishermen in Taiwan 60 feet out found a massive human jawbone. If you Google that also, you can read about that story, and they don't know what to make of it. They think it's a new species of human, and it has a jawbone that is really massive, which indicates, a giant person, an enormous person, and maybe it's a new species. the thing is, we just don't know as much as we'd like to about anthropology, because the remains just don't stick around in every climate. So there are questions to be asked, and it's a challenging thing, because there are moral and ethical implications around this topic, and I would once again say, keep an open mind, and let and science will eventually answer more and more of these questions. And I just think people should move out of a defensive posture and just like, okay, how do you work together to solve this problem? I work with professionals all the time. I work with archaeologists and anthropologists. I'm speaking at a skeptics classroom, Andy White, who he's a debunker, and he has a blog presence on the internet, and we debate back and forth and try to figure things out. But I find him to be, a reasonable person who is respectful, and we just exchange ideas and try to solve the problem rather than just hurl insults at each other. That doesn't get anywhere. So I'm advocating a different approach that really doesn't exist in our society, which is for amateurs and professionals to work together to solve controversial subjects, because that's part of the problem, that people feel like these haven't really been taken on, like a real investigation into look of like, was there contact before Columbus in the United States? Was there ancient machining? You see signs of that. Was there a great flood 12,000 years ago? What is with little people and hobbits and giants that are reported all throughout history in folklore and historic documents? So it's like people want a real objective and scientific look into the possibility of these things, not, oh, it was aliens or absolutely doesn't exist. Like a real objective look, I think,
Are you finding that it's finally taken hold, that we're finally being able to bring this information together and use it for the betterment of education?
I find that like I said, that I find that humans are stuck in a particular orientation of agenda, and in relationships, you have agenda, right? Your males have agenda, females have agenda, and it poisons the well. And it makes you do weird things like, oh, I can't be a whistleblower because I'll lose my job and my kids won't go to school, and I'll end up like just not being able to continue in my profession and things like that. There's agenda drives a lot of human behavior, and what I've done and my brother has done in life is, I've pared down everything. I live in a small place. I've reduced my bottom line. I'm a stonemason by trade, and I just allow myself. I am beholden to nobody. I have, other than Linus the cat that I have to feed. I don't have a lot of responsibility that ties me to a particular way of thinking. And with religion, I am open to all religions and to listen to what it has to say. And I don't like absolutes. I like to test theories and give my honest experience about things. And that's a way I think humans should operate. That's a healthy way. Like, what's for the good of all? That should be the prime directive. Mm-hmm. And once again, you look at politics, it's such a circus. It's a freak show. And religion can be very dogmatic and bitter towards each other, instead of like, just have this openness, like, let's work together. We may not agree, but let's work together to solve the problem. How can this be? How can you test it? So I feel like there's a desire, but I don't feel like there's a lot of this taking place. So that's what I'm trying to do. I try to, our shows, we always have skeptics and professionals on. Once again, I deal with professionals all the time, and it's like, let's critically think about these things that people have an interest in. And I bring in, and I'm not afraid to bring in like the esoteric side of it or the religious side of it. Like, let's look at the documents of the religious documents. Look at Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, and mystics and clairvoyants and what they say about our past. And let's see if the evidence lines up. I'm not afraid to do that. I'm not afraid to, drop the A-bomb and talk about Atlantis. Was it a reality? Did it exist in the middle of the Atlantic? Is it basically, the Freemasons, Rosicrucians, I talk about in this book, Madame Blavatsky, the great mystics, Rudolf Steiner, Edgar Cayce, they all talk about giants and little people as part of the population of the lost continent of Atlantis that sank in the Atlantic and basically spread these populations throughout the world. And it sounds bizarre, but they're all independently, these secret societies and clairvoyants are saying the same thing. That in itself is very odd. And a professional could never go out and say, I read all the education material and it's interesting or compelling. You just can't do that. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just the way, that science is locked down with a rigid mindset. So I kind of free myself to explore those possibilities and write about them and let people reflect on those things.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's an awesome book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We spent a lot of time. We thought we were finished, and then Hugh and I took about another 9 months, and Ross Hamilton, who wrote A Tradition of Giants, it was on our show, worked with us to clean up the language, not the bad language, but the the other language, and basically oriented in a particular way, and I went through great pains to
it's not set on too high of a level, you know what I mean? An average person can read it and understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I try to convey complex topics and put them in a layman's language so people can understand them, and so the greater public can get a grasp of what's going on and decide for themselves. And I think we did a good job in the book because we've got a lot of positive feedback, and it just shows you. It's funny, some of the reviews are very positive, some are negative, and I could tell this person didn't even read the book or give it a chance. It's so kind of lame and agenda driven. One of the problems with the internet is it has been a breeding ground for trolls. That I look at both sides of it. Like I said, I see the true believer side where there isn't a lot of critical thinking. There's a lot of acceptance of a theory that may be controversial instead of really looking at it okay, let's take this apart and see if there's truth there. But on the other side of the aisle, there are just so many disrespectful weasels and trolls who are, to fashion themselves as debunkers and are nothing more than hate bloggers that don't look at things objectively. That doesn't mean they're not skilled and don't make good points sometimes, but when you have no objectivity, and you've lost me in my book. There's no common ground there to work with. So, I have no internet presence. I am not on Facebook. Thankfully, my phone just died a couple of days ago because I hate it. I'm using my brother's right now, but I recommend an old school approach to these problems. The internet can be good to gather information, but I like to interview people and visit sites and read through historical documents. That keeps me sane. The internet makes me want to hang myself. It's such a wasteland.
That it can be. People so often take the first thing like when Mark started out with talking about the fake photos. A lot of them photos keep getting reproduced and reprinted on different websites, and they're proven that they were one of them was a Photoshop contest, and about 6 of one of the ones that keep getting printed are all from that contest, and people think they're real and they're not.
Yeah, that was
no research on none of this stuff. They just look at it and go, oh, look at that, and then they believe it.
That's the will to believe, and I understand that desire, and I've had that in the past too. A will to believe something. Part of it is that a culture is really disturbing as far as I'm concerned. The gross materialism, the endless consumption, and the distractions and all the hits that everybody's trying to get, instead of living a different life that's more in line with nature and the cycles of nature. I just feel like people crave that, and we have a dehumanizing society where we've all worked jobs that we've hated, and that just you just can't wait for your lunch break or the weekend, or I'm just I'm going to go out and get loaded to forget about the misery of my life. And as people get locked in and they have families and they just live lives that they never wanted to live. That they're not free. They're crippled with debt, and the tax system is so regressive, and it works against so many people. 1%ers siphoning off all this money. So we live in a dehumanizing system that people don't want to validate, rightfully so. So they essentially want to believe a different story. And I understand that, you look at pharmaceutical companies and big oil and military industrial complex, they're all up to some pervasive evil in the world. There's no question about it. And they don't care about humans. They don't care about the future of the planet. But then you have the sciences, which I agree with a lot of what the scientists produce. But on the whole, there is filtering that takes place, and people don't want to believe anything about science because, or individual disciplines, because they perceive it or misperceive it as part of a corrupt institution. And I would rather say that, archaeology is not like, big pharma or something like that. They may be stuck in their ways and change may be slow, but they're not part of a corrupt system. But people want to believe a different story of humanity. They want to look at a past where there was more cooperation, or people, lived in a different fashion than our horrible existence that most people live in. I just got to be honest that our
at a time when a handshake was good enough.
Absolutely, and that people work together. I visit sites like the old Stone Fort in Tennessee, and it took like 600 years to build that thing. And just think of the generations doing it, and the pride, and the communal effort, and all that. You guys know, you live in Mound Builder, the heart of Mound Builder country. These enormous earthenworks and geometric forms, and all around the planet, you have activities not always slave-driven. They're just communal efforts to basically create tools of enlightenment, that sacred places. And that's what people crave. So they want to believe, to get back around to your point, is that they'll look at a picture on the internet and they'll just say, oh my God, it's true because I want it to be true, instead of doing 20 seconds of investigation and figure out it's a hoax. So I am trying to be kind of a bridge for like alternative-minded people to maybe trust somebody. Like I'll do my homework. I try not to have an agenda. I'll speak my mind about things like, I think that's really not a reality. That's a hoax. That pyramid isn't real, or whatever. I'll try to be honest. So, because I understand your average person cannot spend an enormous amount of time to learn about, say, archaeology and anthropology, geology, and different sciences. And I try to bring an alternative approach and be a trustworthy person, hopefully like a Graham Hancock, somebody I really trust that does the work, and not to have agenda, just to, figure it out. Because that's what the internet is all about, is agenda. It's like people want to believe what they want to believe. They filter out people who don't share their opinions, right or wrong, and they often don't do the legwork to figure out that things are, are they true or not.
Jim, speaking, you just mentioned the geometric patterns found around Chillicothe, the central Ohio area. Yes, Squire and Davis are some of the first people to explore these mounds, map them. Caleb Atwater did some too, about 30 years earlier than Squire and Davis. But Caleb Atwater kind of made some implications about giants. He'd say, well, when the mound was torn down, you got large and small bones. That's really not conclusive proof. It could suggest giants. It could be just adults compared to children buried in some of the mounds. Squire and Davis, in the late 1840s, really did not mention giants. Did they not find any, or were they incredulous about this idea of giant people?
No. Squire and Davis in 1848 surveyed the mounds for the Eastern Mounds Division of the Smithsonian, I believe. I don't know if it was called that back then. But anyways, they were surveyors that went and mapped out all these geometric forms and burial mounds. They were not excavators, I believe, and they really had no comment on that. They talked a little about the possibility of a lost race theory, which is something I'll get to in a minute. But they were basically the Smithsonian's first effort to survey these enormous and incredible earthworks. And thankfully they did. If you Google Squire and Davis, you'll see some of their old lithographs, and they're just beautiful. These precise geometric forms. You really got to wonder what was going on. Ohio had 1,500 of these structures alone, massive octagons and circles and processional pathways. Like you said, Chillicothe, circle and octagon was connected, they believe, to a circle and octagon at Newark, Ohio, that still partially exists as a golf course. And these sites predicted eclipses and understood the 18.61 year metonic cycle of the moon, and were just fascinating objects that you really wonder what they were. And I believe they were ancient earth machines, kind of like Greg Little and Ross Hamilton would probably agree with, that they were tools of enlightenment, that these structures are used for people to go to and to be guided by the priests and the medicine men, the shamans, basically to move towards enlightenment, if you will. And, you know, I just find all these structures fascinating. But Squire and Davis were surveying them. They didn't really dig into the mounds, and Atwater hinted at that. I would say the real thrust happened when the Eastern Mounds Division, 1870s, 1880s, and 90s, started digging into the mounds and making their report, the Smithsonian reports of the burial mounds in the eastern half of the country. And the reports really indicated that they had encountered some enormous skeletons, 17 over 7 foot accounts, a 7'6" account from your neck of the woods, Professor Norris in West Virginia.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Alton, Illinois, 1873, T.M. Perrin from the Smithsonian commented on multiple enormous skulls, one 36 inches in circumference, which is utterly enormous, well out of normal range. And he said they all crumbled to dust. And that is reported a lot, that these remains were so ancient that they crumbled to dust. But then there were other remains reported that were put on display. And when you look at this little phenomenon, there are hundreds, there are over 1,000 accounts of 7 foot and taller skeletons being unearthed. And you could chalk some up to exaggerations and hoaxes, but a lot of them stand the test of time. Like Miamisburg, 1897, 8 foot 1.5 inch skeleton is unearthed, is authenticated by the head of the Smithsonian, Thomas Wilson, the head of anthropology. And he says, you know, it's antiquity is beyond doubt. And basically they list it with the greatest giants of all time. 8 feet 1.5 inches is pretty enormous. And over again, you have the head of the Carnegie unearthing an over 8 foot skeleton between 8 and 9 feet, as listed in Scientific America. W.J. Holland, the renowned paleoanthropologist, reported it from McGee's Rocks Mound in Pennsylvania. On and on again. The heads of anthropology and archaeology in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, unearthing and documenting over 7 foot skeletons. In the 50s, Don Dragoo, Webb and Snow from Kentucky, unearthing 7 footers at the Dover Mound in Kentucky and the Cresap Mound in West Virginia. So we're looking at the very least of a population of native people, at least the royal class, that were huge, that were over 7 foot tall. Sometimes the males, the females, well over 6 foot tall. The Adena people were known to be particularly large. And the question is, where did they come from? They just seem to appear on the scene, these master architects and builders. And these are the kind of questions I'm sure your listeners have, like where do these people come from? That there's a mystical past to humanity that just doesn't line up, say, with the out of Africa theory or the migration pattern theory. At least in a way of there seems to be like ancient people with a high level of knowledge and attainment that kind of showed up on the scene in different places. It's a strange phenomena.
Yeah, and when you read these, like Webb's, the Dover mounds, Norris's field notes.
Yep.
Some of these burials, 7-foot burials, are on their backs. Some are in sitting positions. There's a great variety of information to be learned from these excavations. Like, do we know if a sitting position was for like the ultimate leader of the area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would recommend The Path of Souls, the Greg Little book, and Andrew Collins. They both talk about Native American, death rituals, and I uncovered an account of the first giant account was in Deerfield, Massachusetts, town history near where I lived. 8-foot tall, heads as big as a peck basket, seated in a sitting position facing the east. Now, a lot of these, like you said, there are burial techniques like all the heads to the center, like the spokes of a whale, or buried in a sitting posture facing the east. And actually, a couple of years back in Egypt, they found a 30,000-year-old skeleton that was buried in a sitting posture facing the east also, which is very odd. Is this like a burial technique that has been passed down for thousands of years, throughout history? The thought is that, the soul travels in that direction when a person dies, so they set the body up like that. But it's also indicative of this being a reality of some measure anyways, because these obscure burial techniques are often mentioned in these giant accounts over and over, which was a clear indication that they are documenting something they are seeing, something real. They're not making, some giant hoax, The hoax is like the last thing I see when I study these accounts. There are some hoaxes and exaggerations, but a real small percentage. It has to be, to dismiss this, it has to be something else. And it can't be faulty regression formulas, because there are specific measurements of femur bones and other bones that are well off, out of normal range. So I don't know, basically how to piece this all together so we, for a coherent reality that can be so many giant skeletons found. But, I leave that to the reader or to the viewer. I just try to make that case that, these are stationary objects measured by the respected people. Like you said, Norris from the Smithsonian, 7'6" skeleton. Now you say, oh, there's a guy in the NBA or whatever. It's like the amount of 7-footers that roam the earth is a pretty small selection. And 7'6", the tallest NBA player in history was 7'7", Manute Bol. And there's just not a lot of 7'6" guys. And you find so many of these like enormous people that you get asked the question, like, who the hell are they and where they come from?
It's just very intriguing. People being buried with that copper suit. That was pretty bizarre. The Moorhead head example from the Hopewell Mound group. That was intriguing. And you also have Webb writing about the what like the wolf jaws placed inside the deceased's mouth. Yeah. There's some really fascinating.
That sounds pretty bizarre.
Yeah. Oh, it's in the Dover.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's Warren K. Moorhead at the Hopewell Mound group. I'll tell you listeners that the mound building culture started at least as far back as 3400 BC at Watson Break, Louisiana. That was the first mound site or the oldest mound site from 3400 BC. And then Poverty Point was this enormous complex in Louisiana from 1500 BC. And there's circular embankments there that would fill the Great Pyramid with earth 36 times. And this massive bird effigy mound there that was 600 feet by 700 feet and 72 feet high. You know, if you look up Poverty Point, Louisiana, you'll see this fascinating ancient site there. And then you have the Adena people who started around 1000 BC in Ohio Valley, building massive earthworks, massive burial mounds. Then the Hopewell people came after them, and then the Mississippian cultures like Cahokia, the 100-foot high, 4 steps earthen pyramid in Collinsville, Ohio, Illinois. The Mississippian people who built Moundville and Sparrow Mounds and other sites that are later, you know, more like 900 to 1500 AD. So there was like 3 mound builder people, if you will, or mound builder civilizations. But, you know, they had these, you know, intense rituals and this ceremonial lifestyle. And, yeah, it's really fascinating. And I think, unfortunately, you know, a lot of this was pushed aside, marginalized. And one of the things was there was a lost race theory that was happening, because when the colonists got here, they looked at the native peoples, and they basically, you know, they were always trying to convert them and you know, beat them over the head with the Bible and stuff like that, instead of basically looking at them and asking what their beliefs are and how they could be so successful for so long. They try to basically denigrate their oh, I hear music.
Yeah, that's our break. We'll be right back.
Oh, okay.
Hold that thought. Men in Black. I want to remind everybody this is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and between now and the end of the month, we got a special. If you donate $50, Hawk will send you a 1-ounce silver bar, and make sure you put your address in there and that it's for the silver bar. Oh, there we go. Now the excitement's over with.
Okay. Yeah, Jim, before the break started, you were talking about the colonists just rushed into the converting the natives, kind of mentality, and I don't think you finished your point.
Yeah, essentially it was, Native Americans were viewed as disorganized, unsophisticated, savage, anti-intellectual, all these, derisive thoughts about Native peoples that were unwarranted, and all these amazing accomplishments that their ancestors had built basically were looked at as something that Native people could never do. So all the geometric forms and, and all these theories came forward, like, ancient Europeans were here doing all this work or a lost civilization. And that was basically a way to separate Native Americans from their past and marginalize their culture. Like, oh, there's nothing to see here, essentially. And it was called the mound builder myth. And it was a racist myth, for the most part. And I would think like Mormons would, have their beliefs about the past in ancient America. And that's not a racist belief, but there was a racist belief at the time that basically Native Americans did not do this. And we know from burial mound excavations and anthropological, archaeological evidence that certainly the Native Americans built the mound sites. And that was addressed by the Smithsonian at the time, the mound builder myth. And one thing that wasn't addressed was giants, and the fact that their scientists, when they did the major mound excavations, kept, articulating that they had found, giant skeletons over and over again. That's what's left us a lot of this enduring mystery. During the initial phase of all these excavations, so many giants were dug up. But to get to the greater point is that native civilization wasn't respected. It was denigrated, and basically it was just wiped off the face of the continent for the most part, which is a extreme tragedy, because there was so much incredible wisdom, and a lot of what the colonists did, they would kill the shamans and the medicine men of native people to cut their ties with the past. And it really blows. It's just like what the Romans did to the Druids and the Spanish did to the Mayan people. A real scourge came out of Europe starting in like 1500 AD, and basically set back like the more spiritual aspects of the world back thousands of years. I really think that, and it's starting to gain steam again as people turn their back on a shitty, debunked, bankrupt culture. But really, it's just a crime, and that's part of this whole story. It's like, who are these native people? What were they doing? Were there, diffusionist elements that were in ancient America that blended with native people? It's really kind of a crime. We don't know as much as we do, but part of what has driven me, and it sounds like you guys, towards the study of ancient America, is just, it was like Greek mythology. You had, kings and queens buried with copper crowns and pearls and these enormous, unbelievable engineering feats all around the country. And I just think it's fascinating. I never learned about it in school, which really disturbed me. It was disconcerting that I never learned this at all. And I'm a voracious reader,
You learn about all the great monuments over in Europe and that, but you never learned anything about the ones here.
Yeah, and that's racist. That's like, if this were a European country, it'd be a different story. We protect these sites, like in European culture, or when the colonists showed up and the endless wars and the tariff acts, we hear all about them. But I learned very little, and we learned very little about native culture that goes back, and is extremely sophisticated and interesting and inspiring and compelling. And it's like, what the hell,
And have monuments just as big as the pyramids.
Yeah.
Just as spectacular as the pyramids, put it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, geometric forms and just this incredible culture that we know little about. So, in that sense, you could say, yeah, we kind of, there is a convoluted story that has been told about the past of ancient America and native people, or a agenda-driven story. So colonists could steal Native American land. That's a fact. So when you get into these subjects, there is more room for speculation than most, because we don't know as much as we should. And subjects like the giants are just derided, so loudly. It's just like, hey, have you ever seen such a controversial subject have so much evidence in historical documents? So the whole historical record just basically talks about another reality. It's the most bizarre thing, like it's there, right?
I agree with you. I don't understand it myself. It makes no sense to me. I mean, there's all the fact, you have all these facts in front of you, and still they deny it.
Well, there's a mystery to figure out. Is what is undeniable. That's my position. And I said, you may not agree with different people may not agree on it, but I think everyone can agree that there's a mystery to be solved here, and you're disingenuous if you don't think so. And that's the cool thing about the book is, if you really read through that, you will see that there's a mystery here. We have chapters on presidents and giants and mystics, like I said, the great mystics and their reports of giants and their ties to lost civilizations. I will say that there is more evidence coming forward. If anybody's a fan of Graham Hancock, I recommend his newest book, Magicians of the Gods. And his videos are really good online too. But Graham makes a really good point that, the Younger Dryas impact theory, the idea that there was a cometary impact around 12,000 years ago, and a great flood occurred across the world, like a cataclysmic flood that all the native people, all the oral traditions all around the planet all talk about. There was geological evidence mounting that this was the case, that it was that catastrophism is part of geology, not just uniformitarianism, and that there was in fact a flood. That I think the Bible got the dates wrong. I think they're talking about the flood from 12,000 years ago, and the Epic of Gilgamesh also talks about that. And we all know there are flood myths all around the planet, and given or produced by peoples that had no contact with each other. Another odd thing, just like the giant question, is all around the world, the oral traditions that were passed down meticulously through generations all speak of giants and little people. All the Native American tribes, all the tribes around the world, all the indigenous people tell the same story. They talk about a lost continent. They talk about little people. They talk about giants. They talk about some hairy thing in the woods, and and they talk about an ancient flood. And I don't know what the hell it means, but it's a comparative mythologist would write a vastly different story. And you have to look at that. You cannot dismiss oral traditions. And I will also say, I'm sure everybody's familiar with Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's a 12,000-year-old astonishing megalithic site,
which they buried for some reason. On purpose.
Yes, after 1,000 years of use, they buried it. And the most interesting thing I found, Graham Hancock interviewed Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who worked for the German Archaeological Institute at the site, who unfortunately passed away from a heart attack about a year ago. He's been replaced since, and they're still digging there. But the oldest enclosures at Göbekli Tepe are the most sophisticated. And then the construction gets worse and worse over 1,000 years. Then it is entirely buried. And the big question is how 12,000 years ago, think of that figure, 12,000 years ago, the hunter-gatherer peoples who lived in the Anatolia region of Turkey organized themselves to essentially create agriculture and create this astonishing megalithic temple site. They had to give up their way of life. They basically, out of thin air, gave up their lifestyle after thousands and thousands of years of living that subsistence way. So what really happened? Was it that some survivors of an ancient flood, the great sages, showed up and basically organized them to do this, to restart civilization, like all the oral traditions talk about? Now, you have these strange handbags at, Göbekli Tepe, and you find them all around the world by they call it like the great civilizers, these like bearded people who came after the great flood, the Vieira coaches and the Kontiki. And you find these same kind of handbags that Graham Hancock talks about in Sumeria and the Mayan cultures, So there are these bearded sages who show up after the flood all around the planet to repromulgate society. And it's a really compelling thing. Like, it really seems to have validity. Like, there was a cataclysmic flood, and we are a species with amnesia. So 12,000 years ago, everything was wiped off the map.
Right, yeah, we got dropped down to somewhere between 12,000 and 16,000 breeding pair at the time. Mankind did.
Jim, is there any information about how to interpret these handbags? Do we know, what the handbags are carrying?
I'd love to know. The oldest representation of Viracocha at the Olmec site of Leventa, I believe, he's carrying one of these. He basically has this man bag. It's this strange thing. It's like this handled purse, and it's on pillar 45, I believe, at Göbekli Tepe. There's 3 of them up top, and you see it. You see them all around the world. I would like to know what is in there. Is it some strange technology? But you could probably Google it and just find it on the internet, like man bags or whatever. Graham Hancock probably wrote an article about it, because I know it's in his book and I know it's in his lectures. And
yeah, there's 2 of them on the Mayan calendar at the bottom.
Yeah.
I always thought they were, personally, what my thought was is they carried the embers for the fire.
Yeah, or it could be some technology, actually.
I've never thought of it that way. I mean, that's a good idea too. I just, when I've seen them in different places, and I just thought, well, hell, that's what they're carrying, the amber for the fire to keep the fire going,
And the real question is, how can they show up all around the world? How can you have the same iconography? Now, you find, what you find in Göbekli Tepe, you find in Easter Island, you find in Sulawesi in Indonesia. You find in different parts of the globe that had no connection with each other.
I never connected them before. I never connected them.
Yes.
Yeah, like seashells all around the world were kind of like a symbol of fertility. How that people in Africa and Arizona had the same symbols. What was there some kind of cultural exchange of ideas?
Very good question. And these are things that should be explored. A comparative mythologist would say, wow, there really seems to be connections between these cultures. Was it diffusionism? Is part of it like the electric universe theory, Immanuel Velikovsky, Worlds and Collisions, and David Talbot, the comparative mythologist? He studied petroglyph sites all around the planet, and you see the same symbols, the strange men that he thinks are representing plasma discharges, because all these people were looking at the same astronomical events of plasma discharges and other things that they were documenting. Or could it be like the swastika shows up everywhere around the globe? Is it ancient symbol? It was the ancient symbol of Atlantis. That's what the mystics told us. And the Nazis basically viewed Atlantis as this place of supermen. So Hitler would send his scientists around the world to find evidence of Atlantis. They thought it was buried under Antarctica or in the middle of the Atlantic, and they took the swastika and they turned it into the crooked cross. And the Native Americans, the Navajos, I have a picture of like a Navajo basketball team in like the early 1900s, and they all have swastikas on their uniforms. Like it was a sacred symbol in Tibet and everywhere else. So you really got to ask yourself, like, is it the collective unconscious? Is it, shared memories, diffusionism? Why the hell are people elongating their skulls all around the planet? That's like the most bizarre thing, and it's never addressed. Like, I always bring that up with anthropologists, and I never get a good answer. It's just like all these cultures that could never know, like to do such an extreme and bizarre thing to their children, like elongate their freaking skulls, are doing it. And all around the world, what does it mean? What do these things mean? They're worth looking at. This isn't like, there are some stupid theories out there. The internet is filled with such lame horse shit, phony theories, bad research, preconceived notions. And, I've had to burn everything to the ground and start from scratch like 6 years ago. Like, I could trust nothing on the internet I found. There were a few people that I respected as researchers, and I had to do all the work myself from a non-agenda driven orientation to try to I don't want to be right. I want to get it right, essentially, from that angle.
So since you just brought up elongated skulls, it seems like the Adena were, practicing it, but in the, it was, more like the cradle boarding, but you get some of these samples from the Paracas area where it seems like there are suggestions that this is the way the people looked, like without having the cradle boarding done.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know. Yeah, Brian Forrester and L.A. Marzulli have been talking about that, and I think some DNA testing was done. You have to look at the science there, and I'm dubious that it's strongly indicating that people were born with elongated skulls. Although I've seen people with elongated skulls naturally too. So, I have to wait to see harder science to really draw that conclusion. But I will certainly say it's quite fascinating, and it really brings up a good question. What the hell is this? What is it? That Karen Hughes is a whistleblower. She was the former lead counsel of the World Bank, and last year she did this interview, and she made all these bizarre claims in it. And she talked about that beings with elongated skulls essentially are, behind the power structure of the earth and manipulating banks and the Vatican and stuff. And this woman was the lead counsel for the World Bank, and she came up with, and she was, basically blew the whistle on them with all this legitimate corruption, and what she was hailed for. And then at the same time, she's giving this interview, and she's talking about these beings with elongated skulls who basically were more active around the last ice age, is what she said. If you Google Karen Hughes elongated skulls, you will hear her interview or get the transcript of it. It's the most bizarre thing. And I just found it very, very odd. And she talked about like some whacked-out dude with elongated skull being at some board meeting or something like that. I would recommend listening or looking at that. And once again, she was the former lead counsel of the World Bank, who was a whistleblower, and she's talking about this. So is there, and we know what a freak show the world is. We know the level of corruption and the things that can happen. And it just seems like there's this different story of humanity that isn't known about. It's certainly not the way that the Orthodox people subscribe to. And I'm not deriding them. I agree with a lot of conventional theories, and most, in fact. But there is a big piece that's missing, the metaphysical, spiritual, kind of, I don't know how to express it, but there is this strange reality. I don't know if it's other realities interfacing with our reality. I don't know if it's the multiverse theory, the holographic universe, what the hell is going on. But I'll tell you, reality is quite odd, and it is not addressed by the sciences. It's kind of pushed aside as pseudoscience. Then on the other end, the true believers often don't look at it objectively and believe things that there is no good reason to believe. So, once again, as I stand in the middle, I will say science has a role and the alternative side has a role, but reality is vastly different and more strange than you could ever imagine.
And in Giants on Record, you also bring up the hyperdontia, the double rows of teeth, which Thomas has that gene. So it's I'm not trying to.
I had it. They took them out.
Yeah. You're a surviving example of that. But
well, no, that just means that anomalies do happen in the human body.
Yeah,
it's a strange thing, and I've been going back and forth with Andy White about this, and he's saying it might have been like a parlance of the time, like double teeth were indicating perfect teeth, so many native people had perfect teeth compared to the Europeans whose teeth are rotting out of head because they all had syphilis, And but I think there's more to the story. I've met people with double rows of teeth, and there were so many specific accounts. So to me, it indicates just another thing that how could all these professionals be talking about double rows of teeth if they're making up hoaxes, right? Like, in California in 1856, I'm going to talk about all these skulls with double rows of teeth because I'm going to make up some stupid hoax. It doesn't make sense. Once again, we're dealing with human remains, human burials, human artifacts, specific dimensions, accounts of explorers, live eyewitness accounts. It really, it leaves a lot to the imagination here. This is not smoke and mirrors. There is something to the story, no question about it. And anatomical anomalies are a weird part of it. Go to the petroglyph sites out in the southeast, or actually at sites all around the country. You see feet and hands massive with 6 fingers and 6 toes. Mm-hmm. You have the giant of Gath in the Bible. I think it's Samuel 21:20. The giant of Gath had 6 fingers and 6 toes, 24 digits in all. Now, I am not a Bible literalist. I view it, as a historical document. And I view the Quran as a historical document, and I view the Torah and the the Chinese texts and the Hindu texts, and I read them all, and I take them as an attempt to tell the story of humanity. So I don't dismiss it. I don't fully accept it as some unassailable fact, I try to look at all these documents objectively, and I really find it odd that they basically tell the same stories. They talk about ancient floods. They talk about giants, specific accounts. So, if you're religious, one thing I'll say is that, to mention giants is like I said, it's Republican and Democrat. Like, I am not going to yield abortion, gun control, whatever it is you believe in. It's like, I'm not going to yield anything. If I even, talk about an ancient flood, which I think is no question a historical reality. There's no question in my mind. And the geological oceanographic evidence is there, but that's a story for another day. But the sides are unwilling to yield anything to the other side. So you end up in this, entrenched kind of bitter debate instead of like, just because it's ancient flood doesn't mean everything in the Bible is true. Now, believe me, there's a lot of nonsense in the Bible, like Leviticus, like wizards and mediums and homosexuals should all go to hell or something like that. It's if you're gay, you're born gay. You don't choose to be gay. I don't want to get too controversial, but it's in your genetics. I have millions of gay friends and lesbian friends, and it's like they're clearly born that way. And I just say, if your religion is like forgiving and supportive of people, like living their lives in a caring, thoughtful way, I'm all for it. But there's a lot of wackiness in religions too, and there's a lot of dogma. And if you don't look at that, it's like the Buddha would encourage his students always to question his teachings, and that's what should be done in every religion. I'm kind of a dude who believes in reincarnation until we kind of break out of this place that isn't our home, if you will. And I'm open to debate that. I'm just saying that, just look at everything objectively. Don't take anything as like, this is unassailable facts, It's just, that's not the way that, experience works. Honor what you feel about an experience.
Okay. Well, I think it's a little late for you not to be controversial.
Too late. Cat's out of the bag. But I would say that you can be controversial, and you can be respectful, and you can be open-minded. And, I just think like, it's the way you go about it. Like, don't be disrespectful. If you don't agree with something, like I said, like with religion, I studied all the world's religions, and I studied all the esoteric religions, Sufism, Taoism, and Buddhism, and, the Kabbalah and esoteric Christianity, the Gnostic Gospels. And, I find there are current themes in all of these things, in Islam, and, and you see that, at the core, people are essentially all the same. And they want the same things. They strive for the same things oftentimes, and sometimes they don't, and that's fine. It's just like you don't support those efforts. But what I'm saying is, I think objectivity in your personal experience is so important. I grew up Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic, and I just got a lot of like, this is the way it is thrown at me, and I'm like, well, my experience tells me something different. I don't believe that's true, so I want to explore this notion, and everybody should explore the teachings of their religions or the government or their schools and see if their experience tells them. We all have this internal guidance system, this barometer. You meet people and you immediately know there's something wrong. Like, this person's a whacked out vampire. They're like mentally unstable. They're not looking out for my best interests, and they'll creep you out. You'll feel energetically bad, and you got to honor that. And it's like, I don't want to hang with that person. God bless him. And it's just like, honor your experience. Don't be dictated reality. Because sometimes religious people will be pissed that orthodox scientists are dictating reality to them, but their religion does the same thing to them, and they don't always question it. These are just obvious truths. Like, that doesn't mean you're going to burn in hell. It's just like, question your religion. Like, it's not the end of the world. It's like, yeah, I feel like that makes sense, but this other part of my religion is weird. And like, the Catholic Church, like not letting priests get married, that's ridiculous. That's what causes, a lot of these problems is like unnatural sexual, like, building up basically. Pope Leo in 1088 decreed that priests shouldn't be married. This isn't sent by God. This is some whacked out pope in the 11th century coming up with this decree. That's not good, policy. So, anyways, I don't want to get tangential. The point I'm making is, I think everybody honor your experience and question your belief systems. That doesn't mean to be disrespectful. That means to, listen to your internal guidance system.
Yeah, and Jim, in one sample you do, I don't think you really question Norris's measurements of the 7'6" guy at the Great Smith Mound, but in one sample of the 18-foot tall guy, yeah, you do say that's, yeah, let's take a look at the way the measurement, yeah, you don't rush into saying, well, okay, there's the greatest or the tallest person that ever lived in ancient America. Yeah, you are questioning how the measurements were done. You found some doubt in it. Yeah, so you are discriminating with your information.
Yeah, you can't just jump in and oh, it's written down, it's true. It's just you dig into the story. I couldn't find a lot behind it. I do find a lot of these accounts, they are real people, real places, and seemingly real events, some of these larger accounts, 11, 12, 14, 18 foot tall, of course you have to be dubious. They could have been a reality. Once again, I looked anthropologically at that. Is there a link? Is there, the Native Americans would talk about a late Pleistocene race of giants that existed in ancient America. It sounds crazy, but they were basically wiped off the earth is what, the Bible would tell us and other historical documents and oral traditions. And, maybe it's a possibility that there were 18-foot tall people. It sounds crazy, but once again, there were beavers as big as Volkswagens and giant lizards, and there was megafauna, wasn't there? and what the hell are dinosaurs? Where did dinosaurs come from, man? One thing is that, was the climate different? And even up until 12,000 years ago, were the geological, the atmospheric conditions that existed. I know scientists did studies, I think Japanese scientists, about having some form of concentrated environment where they made things grow extremely fast or something like that. There was some experiment that talked about that. I wish I had more details, but yeah, was the atmosphere different at different times in the past that created enormous growth patterns? Yeah, these are all questions to ask, and try to bring in science and see if you can verify these things, or just ask. Once again, you have a theory that's set in stone and doesn't get questioned a lot. Question everything. And I admire that, there are creationists that are questioning how old dinosaur bones are, And if you listen to Edgar Cayce, it sounds like he was saying, the mystic, that dinosaurs actually lived a lot longer or into the present, and the dates are different, basically. And let's see what science decide. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that debate, but the carbon dating of dinosaur bones. I'm not going to proclaim it one way or the other, but hey, let's see what the science says. Don't stop the science, and because there's no way this could be possible. That's lame, and that gives science a bad name.
Well, they've actually got DNA samples from dinosaur bones from a T-Rex recently, actually. Actually, DNA.
Right? Yeah. I think there was tissue or something, or that's fascinating.
And DNA ain't supposed to live that long.
No, it's a good question. And yeah, let's see. And that's the thing, that's the bias showing right there. That of course, you want to pay for the test, so let's bring it to the University of Georgia, do whatever the isotope test, whatever they did. The University of Georgia, once they caught wind that the creationists were the ones doing these tests, they stopped accepting the samples, I believe, which is lame. Just as It doesn't mean, you have to believe the Earth is 5,000 years old or whatever. It's just like, do the tests and see what the science tells you, the end. And that shows you that. And that's why people, kind of get pissed at, the closed-mindedness or the debunking attitude of scientists sometimes. It's like, hey, go through the science or let's look at these things objectively and see what happens. And, yeah.
Well, a lot of them write the history, the books that are taught in the schools, and they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them.
Yeah, that's agenda, right? Oh shit,
Mm-hmm.
My kids are going to college. If I start rocking the boat, I'm not going to get my tenure. I'm going to be perceived as a weirdo. It's really once again, people have agendas. They have unconscious imperatives, biological imperatives. The human being moves in particular ways that aren't in its best interest. It does things that kind of imprison it. And
we kind of got a suicidal tendency, don't we?
Humans are programmed. Whatever alien species create us as a mining slave race really did a shit job. Or maybe they did a good job for them. Because humans are wired in a particular way of being separate and not seeing reality for what it is. And, that's what I try to do. I try to put my money where my mouth is. And I was just down in Ecuador for a month, and I did ayahuasca San Pedro retreats with shamans down there, and, basically look at the universe from a different perspective, a multidimensional perspective, a holographic perspective. And I study esoteric teachings and different things like the Course in Miracles and other metaphysical teachings. And basically I have a view that, everything is interconnected. It's basically, a holographic universe, if you will. And the humans are hell-bent on separation. It's like the operating software of the body, which is good, don't touch the stove, has fully taken over, and everybody's running around like a fearful Russian orphan, essentially, that disconnected from each other. That's what I find.
And everything's just told so they can't touch it.
Yes. But that operating software has taken over. So instead of the larger self running the show, the more intuitive, inspired version of you, that kind of small lizard brain loser version of you is running the show. And I see that in a lot of people, and it's unfortunate. It's sad. And we don't think collectively like, hey, maybe we want to have a couple less kids. There's freaking 7 billion people on the planet. Or maybe we don't want to poison our water system or pave over the world or have shitty corporations like Monsanto, kill every insect that's vital to life, Like people, because of agenda, don't talk reasonably about these things, like in corporate positions. They're like, I get a good thing going. My shitty kids, are like in school, in the private school, and my wife's driving the Lexus. And, instead of like being a man and stepping up and saying, this is wrong, I'm going to show some balls and I'm going to say what's right. Everybody takes the weak route, It's unfortunate. It's like people need to move to doing what's right and get out of agenda. So sorry, that's my rant.
Oh, no, I fully agree with everything you said there. It is a shame that we're not paying attention to our history, and that, I mean, we could learn from it. And I believe that the indigenous species here in the United States was living the way we were meant to live, in harmony with the nature. I mean, of course, they had their problems, war and battles and stuff, but they lived more in harmony with nature than we have in the last 150 years.
Bingo. For 12,000 years, there were these incredible stewards of the land. Yes, Native peoples had conflicts, but it was more towards when the colonists got there that their civilization was breaking down, and the diseases brought by the early Spanish explorers caused chaos, as we know. But Native peoples had the game pretty tight for a long, long time. They were an exemplary example of how to live, together and appreciate each other, at least tolerate each other. And it's agreed. And people looking for it now, man. There's like, I do stonework. I build stone towers, and I'm rebuilding miles of walls on my road right now. And I just like this effort of doing something for the good of all, for all people to share, and and there's not these communal efforts anymore where you get together. You guys know the stone sites all around the planet are so unbelievable, and that's people getting together for a higher purpose and working together and being outdoors.
Yeah. There wasn't slaves doing that kind of work. Them weren't slaves. Them were devoted people.
It was the community.
Bingo. Yeah. Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And that's just a way to denigrate a communal effort, is to say slaves did it, And we all know Zawi Hawass, the Egyptologist, is a piece of shit, And there's a lot of people who look at these ancient sites as, all the slaves did it. The Romans had a lot of slaves doing things like that, and a lot of other civilizations. But the indigenous peoples, native peoples, especially the Americans, built a lot of these things communally. And that's what's missing in our society. It's a misperception that we're all different. It's like we're all, we all share the same earth, of course, but we all share the same source too. There's no question in my mind. And if you are interested in the nature of reality, I'd watch Brian Greene's special. He's a quantum theorist who did a 4-part special on PBS called Fabric of the Cosmos, I believe. And
oh yeah, he's a pretty awesome guy.
He's awesome.
Him on the show.
Yeah, no, he's brilliant. And quantum mechanics is telling us that the world of time and space is essentially a projection from outside of time and space, from outside of the universe. That it's a dream, it's an illusion, like the indigenous people have told us for so long. And it is, it's totally interconnected and holographic. We are basically dreaming the same dream as one mind, appearing to be a billion pieces, separate pieces. If you look at an object that's 20 billion light years away, you change it at the subatomic level. Why is that? Because it's coming from your mind. Your mind is the projector, and the world, the universe of time and space is the screen. So your mind is creating your reality, and everybody's victims of everything. Oh, the government screwing me over. Oh, I can't get a good job. Your mind is creating your reality. You get nothing to bitch about. You keep attracting the same screwed up partner. Like, we all have friends who do that. Are you a victim of that? No. Your mind is creating that reality for you. Change the software program in your mind, ask for something different, and think something different, and it will happen. There's no question about it. Quantum physics tells us that time is an illusion. Essentially, there is a universal now, and that is it. And when you study quantum mechanics, it is not some ephemeral science. It is the hardest, incontrovertible, scientifically proven science that there is. It's fascinating, and it tells you that the world of time and space is something we really don't understand, and that we're all interconnected. So that's the main point of all this, All these investigations and different attitudes and different opinions should be looked at through that lens, that when you conflict with somebody else, when you're endlessly at war, you're essentially at war with yourself, because we are all the same. As the Buddhists say, when you judge someone, it's like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die.
That's some words of wisdom right there.
It is. Jim, do you have a conference or a public speaking event where you'll be covering anything like this?
Yeah, let me think. What the hell am I doing? I'm filming again this summer. We did a 2-hour special on the Lost Colony of Roanoke last year. We're filming another special this year, which is sizing up pretty well. That's a really cool story. And then we pitched to a worldwide anthropological, archaeological mystery show. And hopefully the history will bite on that, because what I want to do is cover all these controversial subjects in different episodes. Was there an ancient flood? Little people, hobbits, ? Ancient machining, ? Giants, ? And really get into these subjects in a scientifically minded way, in an open-minded way, look at from mystical viewpoints or controversial data, go to Göbekli Tepe, go scuba diving in the Sicily Channel where there's a 10,000-year-old standing stone on its side, things like that. So really, given it, when you're down in Pumapunku, did aliens build this? I'm sorry, that's a silly premise. That's like driven by this is a successful series. Let's, the producers want 10 episodes. What the hell do we do? Not, oh, that's a reasonable premise or hypothesis. The reality is a lost civilization answers a lot of the questions all around the globe a lot easier than other, aliens did this or that. It just doesn't make sense. And there's no real concrete proof. But anyways, I'd like to look scientifically with a team into all these different areas. I did a conference in London with Hugh, and we did some in Glastonbury, and I don't think I have anything on the schedule until I'm doing a tour with Brian Forrester and Hugh in November, Megalithomania tour, which if anybody's got some money in the mattress, that'd be cool. We're going to Machu Picchu and Pumapunku and Sacsayhuaman and all kinds of awesome places down there. But once again, I look at these things and I'm like, I'm trying to be objective. What is the evidence? If it looks like machining to me, I'm just not going to say, oh, it's ancient machining. I'm not going to rely solely on my opinion. I engage engineers and architects, and I try to figure out, is there validity to this, and how do they carbon date this? Is it spurious? Is it, basically agenda driven? Was it open-minded? All these things, try to look at these problems from a reasonable perspective.
When do you think the TV show may air?
Well, I know, recreating a full giant show is difficult because there's moral and ethical implications. It's a very challenging show, as you might imagine, because what history rightfully is looking for, like an action adventure sequence. And we had some cool ones, like the Bone Cave in Tennessee. But the truth is, it's really difficult because you cannot disturb Native American burial grounds to kind of live out that action sequence, if you will. So we are confident we could do an episode, a really intelligent, interesting show about giants. But and I just want to cover a large variety of, it would occur next year if it comes down the line. And our ratings were good for our last show at Roanoke, and I hope they're good again this summer because it's a really fascinating story. And I think the history likes my brother and I that, I don't know, I think people feel like I could trust these guys. We fight against, bullshit and dry humps in our shows and try to get, we have a really good research team and Left Right Studios, and the producers are really brilliant. And we essentially work as a 8-person research team when we do these shows. And, we try to put humor and intrigue into our shows. But at the end of the day, I think people get the vibe that we're not scumbags, that we're trying to, that our lives are oriented around kind of doing the right thing and being helpful towards people and kind of, displaying a mystery too and leaving the mystery open for people to decide. So I hope that translates into more shows in the future because I'm immune to fame and certainly you don't get paid a lot, but I just like creating cool things that make people think differently. I'm kind of that dude, I like to think outside the box.
Mm-hmm. So, and have you still been investigating the stone chambers in New England?
Yes, I have for quite a while. It's really that's an interesting one because at first, once again, when I started investigating things, I got a lot of pushback, and it got me into this position I have to prove the case rather than let me truly be objective and look at these things. Now, I think Dennis has a very unique site at America's Stonehenge, and I don't know what to make of that, quite honestly. It's I've been up there, and I like Dennis. He's a real nice guy. It's a fascinating site. I want to build a time machine is all I could say to figure out. I really don't think, I don't think that site's 200 years old. I really think that's an ancient site. But there are other places that, I go both ways. There are stone chambers that were found in Missouri and Wisconsin that were built by Native Americans that look exactly like the ones we have in New England. But what I have not found in New England is artifact evidence to support the case that these are pre-colonial. Now, there's some people who say, oh, the Celts built them and stuff like that, but there's not a lot of evidence for a large diffusionist population of like Celtic people. I would think if they are ancient to Native American, I think that there's a Native American ceremonial landscape all around the country made of stone and earth. I think in New England there is a stone ceremonial landscape. I see so many turtles and serpents of stone and stone mounds. But then I see things that are misconstrued as Native American or ancient when they're really colonial. So I've been looking objectively, and I have, I'm on the fence about the chambers because I have not seen that evidence. They are either early colonial or Native American would be my guess, and I would have to see artifact evidence like a cache of Native artifacts found at a chamber site to convince me otherwise. So. Absolutely. I study all these things. I think they're fascinating. I think people love the idea of... Oh, is that the magic music?
No, it was me moving in my old chair. Sorry.
It's the old chair.
Yeah, I was leaning up so I could let you know that we were getting close to the end of the show, and I want to make sure people can find you. So do you have a website that you can direct them to?
Yeah, good question. I'm in the witness protection program of giantologists. What the hell? Hugh, my buddy Hugh is great. He's Mr. Social Media. We have a Facebook page that he runs. What the hell is it called? A search for the Lost Giants. A search for the Lost Giants page on Facebook. Hugh's always posting on that. And if you want to leave a message or insult me, you can feel free. I check that every once in a while. Yeah, that's a good question.
Your book
I don't have
found on Amazon?
Yes. Giants on Record. If you have an interest in this, I would recommend getting it. To me, it's a fascinating topic. We come from a million different angles. We don't jam it down your throat. We try to make it interesting. And I just think it's a fascinating story. If nothing else, you'll learn about more, legitimate or uncontested facts about ancient America, about burial mounds and ancient cultures. It's a really fascinating book. So you can get it at Amazon.com. And yeah, I hang out with my cat Linus and stay secluded. Maybe I'll have an internet presence at one point, but I just like kind of writing books and doing research and
We thank you for joining us, and I hope you all enjoyed tonight. Mark, you want to say goodnight?
Hey, thanks, Jim. Hey, we'll see everyone next week with Dr. Jared Burks for the first hour, and I think we'll be getting into the Global Pyramid Conference for the second hour.
Y'all have a good evening. Enjoyed it.